campaign spokesperson for President Trump's 2020 re-election effort. Actually, a well-known voice that you've probably seen and face that you've seen. Kayleigh McEnany joins us now from D.C. Kayleigh, thank you so much for making the time, and I know you've been following these very closely. Your initial impressions of what you saw this afternoon?
Yeah, my initial impression was that this entire inquiry was taken down in 7 minutes, and the 7 minutes to which I refer are those by Jim Jordan, where he point blank asked Bill Taylor, you had 3 meetings with President Zelensky between the July 25th phone call and between the releasing of aid. Did Zelensky ever bring up to you this linkage between aid and investigating? And he said point blank, no, he did not. And then he went on to say, and just to confirm, your clear assumption that in fact there was a linkage was based on 6 conversations in 1 sentence, and he was clearly pointing out the hearsay nature of this testimony. So he didn't go after the credibility of the witnesses, but rather question the substance of the matter, which I thought was very effective.
Interesting. Again, Kayleigh McEnany, Trump Campaign 2020 spokesperson, joining us here on our presentation of Nexstar's presentation of the impeachment hearings. Kayleigh, my name is Evan Donovan. I'm the political reporter here in Tampa, Florida for our station. I wanted to kind of challenge you a little bit on what you just mentioned, though. I thought Representative Jordan, as he always does, was a fierce advocate for the president and certainly for the Republican side. You do mention, though, that one of the things he said was that in the 55 days that were in between these two crucial dates, that never was any linkage brought up from Zelensky to Ambassador Taylor or to any of the other diplomats, including Ambassador Sondland, during the times that they met. But the first 2 of those 3 times, they didn't even, at least the first 2 of those 3 times, they didn't even know that the aid was being withheld. So, hard for them to bring it up if they didn't actually know that it was happening. No?
Right, and therein lies, I think, an even bigger point, which is that they didn't know about the aid until Politico reported on it on August 29th. So if this was a quid pro quo, boy, was it a pretty bad quid pro quo when the quid was absolutely unknown to the person who was allegedly pressured, and that would be the president of Ukraine. So, that is, I think, an even bigger point than the 3 meetings is the fact that Ukraine didn't even know that the aid was being held up until they heard it publicly reported by the press. So if there was this linkage, one would assume that Ukraine would have actually known about the linkage and the holding up of aid.
And Ambassador Taylor did testify that once Ukrainian officials found out about it, even though, in his words, he said they didn't want to become involved in partisan American politics, they were possibly willing to make some sort of statement because of how crucial that aid is to the Ukraine. In that example, Kayleigh, isn't it sort of dangerous, as both of those men testified, for America to be withholding military aid to a huge ally of the United States in Eastern Europe?
Well, lethal aid to Ukraine was held up for 8 years, and the 8 years to which I refer are the Obama years, where it was never given. They were given blankets, Ukraine was, but never Javelin missiles. It was only President Trump that did that on September 11th. So, for someone to be so concerned about this aid and neglect the fact that it was withheld for 8 years under Obama, never given, I think is really ignoring the fact that President Trump did give the aid in the end. And that, to me, is a key optimal point. He did more for Ukraine, certainly, than his predecessor had ever done.
Well, notwithstanding that point, though, Kayleigh, let me challenge you again on that. That aid was finally released to the Ukraine 2 days after the House Select Committee on Intelligence learned of the whistleblower's complaint. Additionally, as Mick Mulvaney talked about, the acting chief of staff, that aid would have had to have been officially released to Ukraine by the end of September, the fiscal year for the government. Otherwise, it would have been lost and not able to be statutorily given to Ukraine. So one could make the argument, Kayleigh, that there were other forces that acted upon the Trump administration to release that aid.
Well, that I would say that's speculation. The aid was given when it was given. It was given on September 11th. But I would note that the president did have concerns about corruption in Ukraine. As Jim Jordan said, Ernst & Young rated Ukraine as one of the top 3 most corrupt places in the world. It is not abnormal for President Trump to hone in on corruption and make sure that U.S. taxpayer dollars are going to their most effective use. He's done so with the Northern Triangle countries, for example. So he wants to ensure that taxpayer dollars are used wisely wisely. And if Democrats have a problem with that, then I would suggest they take it up with the U.S. taxpayer, who will full well understand making sure that their money doesn't go to corrupt purposes, and ultimately understand that it was President Trump who got the aid that Obama never could deliver.
Couple of more minutes here with Kayleigh McEnany, a spokesperson for the Trump campaign in 2020. I want to thank her again for joining us as we're waiting for the House Select Committee on Intelligence members to come back into the room after what we expect to be the final recess. Kayleigh, I want to ask you about a couple things that came up in today's testimony. The State Department and the Trump administration sought to block the testimony of both Ambassador Taylor and George Kent today. If the Trump administration, as President has said, was a perfect phone call with President Zelensky of the Ukraine, why seeking to block the testimony of these two individuals?
Well, because this is a coup attempt against a sitting president. This is a sham impeachment inquiry that we've seen that as this way from the beginning. We don't want to legitimize this. And in fact, this president gave the firsthand account of what happened when he opened up the transcript, gave it to the American people, unprecedented. The president is entitled to privacy in his calls with foreign leaders, is entitled to be able to conduct U.S. foreign policy. No other president freely gives out their phone calls with foreign leaders for a reason. We don't want foreign leaders to think that their words will be released to the American public. But President Trump gave the firsthand account. There's no need for this impeachment inquiry. And I know the Democrats want us to continue for the next year to play into their hand that first it was Russia, now it's Ukraine, it's always something. But we're certainly not going to sit here and try to legitimize this. They'll move forward with this impeachment inquiry, and we believe pay a heavy price at the ballot box.
Ambassador, it's certainly interesting to see whether that is the case. Kayleigh McEnany making the point that this could be political suicide for the Democrats. I think that's something that we heard echoed by Nancy Pelosi, actually, for many months or the first few years of the Trump presidency as the Mueller investigation was going on. It'll be interesting to see what happens in 2020 if the president is eventually impeached under this inquiry. I want to ask you about what you just mentioned right there, though. The fact that the testimony was attempted to be blocked, there are also documents that both of them referenced throughout the day today that they have provided to the State Department that, again, haven't been released to the House Committee on Intelligence. Perhaps not appropriate for the public to see those, given that the notes that they take, technically, I guess you could make an argument that the public should see them since they are federal record and not their own personal record. But does the State Department under the Trump administration have any plans to release their notes that they have provided to this committee?
I would refer you to the State Department on that. That would be outside of my purview. But what I would say is, again, the president gave the text of the transcript. Nothing is going to change what is actually in that call. Right now, we're talking about the personal opinion of Bill Taylor, who never even spoke with the president, who was not on the call, and who learned about the call and what was in the call the same time our neighbors did when the transcript was released. So, in all due respect, Bill Taylor can have an opinion about the transcript, but his notes aren't going to give us much more information because he wasn't on the call and he never spoke to the president, so he's not a fact witness.
And we should be clear, it's a memo of the call, a summary of the call, not an exact transcript. Does the White House plan on releasing the call itself?
Well, it has released the call. Look, that is what you read are the president's words. They are Zelensky's words. If the Democrats,
but they're not an exact quote, Kayleigh. We know that to be true.
If Democrats, those are the president's words. If Democrats want to make the case this is somehow a fake transcript, by all means, they can make that case. But I don't think it's going to work very well.
Well, I'm not here to make the Democrats' case for them. I'm just saying that that's not a transcript of the call. It's a memorandum summary of the call. I'm wondering if whether that call, which was also put on a private White House server that is typically reserved for highly sensitive materials, whether the call itself will be released.
I don't think there's anyone questioning the substance of the call. I certainly didn't hear that from Adam Schiff today, who would be, if there was any question about the substance of the call, we'd certainly hear it from corrupt Adam Schiff. So this has been put out there. These are the president's words. If someone wants to make hay of the fact that they say it's not a direct transcript, by all means, but even Democrats aren't going to that length because this is the call. It is put forward. Bill Taylor's not questioning the words on that call. He wasn't on it, though. But those who were fact witnesses of that call, no one is questioning the substance of that call.
Ambassador Taylor also testified today that Ukraine was livid that the Trump administration released the memorandum summary of that call without actually notifying them. Any response to that part of his testimony, Kayleigh?
This is the president's phone call with the leader of Ukraine. He's allowed to release it. I think people tend to forget there's one person who won an election. It wasn't Bill Taylor, it wasn't George Kent. It was President Trump who won an election on November 8th, 2016. And when he won that election, one of the consequences of that was he had plenary power over the nation's foreign policy. The American people entrusted him with that. So he has the right to release the call, to not release the call. He's the president of the United States and he conducts U.S. foreign policy. So people can give their opinions, which is what we heard from Taylor today and others. But the call is the call, and there was no quid pro quo, and we're standing by that.
Kayleigh McEnany joining us, Trump 2020 campaign spokesperson. I wanted to note for folks at home, I'm on the Trump campaign 2020 distribution list. Several texts today about this impeachment inquiry with the goal of raising money from the impeachment inquiry. That's not abnormal. We see that happen on both sides of the aisle. I imagine from the campaign's point of view, yourself and campaign manager Brad Parscale, you both believe that this is a winning issue in 2020, the entire impeachment inquiry. Is that correct?
Well, look, of course, we don't want to see the president impeached. We never wanted this inquiry to open to begin with. That goes without saying. But it has definitely motivated our base. I go to every one of the president's rallies. Our supporters have never been more motivated. The numbers don't lie when we bring in $15 million in 3 days after Nancy Pelosi announced this inquiry. And that is the same amount that Joe Biden got in the entire third quarter. So a 3-month period, we raised that in 3 days. So certainly has energized our supporters. I think we'll just embolden them as they go to vote here in less than a year. But look, none of us want to see this happen. We do think it's a real tragedy anytime you try to overturn the will of the American people.
Kayleigh McEnany, Trump 2020 campaign spokesperson. I want to thank you so much for joining us. I know this is a long afternoon. You were watching intently, as I know we were here, and we really appreciate your time. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Have a great day.
Absolutely. You too.